My name is Clara Mitchell, and I will never forget that crisp autumn afternoon in Napa Valley. The vineyard shimmered gold under the sun, and laughter floated like champagne bubbles. It was my son Ethan's wedding day, and I had hoped it would be the happiest day of his life and mine. But when Vanessa, my new daughter-in-law, turned toward the crowd and said, "This is Ethan's mom, the one who still thinks buffet food is fancy," a wave of laughter rolled through the guests. Then she smirked and added, "A real fat pig." The sound of those words sliced through me sharper than any knife. I stood there, frozen, my smile trembling while my heart cracked in silence. Across the room, I caught the startled eyes of her father, Charles Reed, who suddenly recognized me, the quiet woman who had bought his failing company 2 years ago. If you've ever swallowed humiliation to protect your dignity, stay with me. My story doesn't end at that table. In fact, it was only the beginning. That night, as the music faded, old memories began to rise from the shadows. The laughter at the wedding table still echoed in my ears, but my mind drifted far away from the music and the lights. I looked around that golden ballroom in Napa Valley, pretending to smile, pretending to belong. Yet inside me, a quiet voice whispered of another time before humiliation, before secrets, before my son became a stranger. 15 years ago, I was not the silent widow people see today. I was Clara Mitchell, an energy engineer who believed that hard work could change the world. My husband Henry and I worked side by side for decades in our small workshop. We built something simple but powerful, a microchip that made batteries last longer. We spent years testing, failing, and trying again until one day a company offered us $22 million to buy our patent. I remember the night Henry opened that letter. He laughed, tears in his eyes, saying, "Clara, we finally did it. We didn't buy luxury cars or fancy clothes. We invested carefully, piece by piece, into renewable energy and community projects. Our goal was never to be rich, it was to be secure. To live with dignity when our hands grew tired." Ethan was still in college back then, studying engineering like us. He never knew how much money we had. We wanted him to understand the value of work, not inheritance. Then one spring morning, Henry walked into our garden with a cup of coffee and never came back. A heart attack took him before the ambulance arrived. I buried him under the oak tree behind our home in Santa Rosa, the tree we planted the year we were married. Since that day, I have lived alone in that house, driving an old Subaru that rattles in the cold. My neighbors think I live off a small pension, and I let them think that. It keeps my life simple, peaceful, invisible. People say loneliness is the price of survival, but I don't believe that. I find comfort in the quiet. The smell of Henry's old flannel shirts still lingers in the closet. The ticking clock in the kitchen sounds like his steady heart. Sometimes when I bake his favorite apple pie, I still set 2 plates on the table before realizing only one will be used. I never remarried. Instead, I learned to live with my silence like an old friend. I managed the investments myself, with help from Alan Price, Henry's former colleague turned lawyer. Alan once told me, "Clara, you're one of the smartest clients I've ever had." But I didn't need praise. I just wanted security. Over time, the $22 million grew slowly but surely into something much larger, enough to buy companies, to save jobs, to give back quietly. And through it all, Ethan never knew. To him, I was just Mom the widow who baked bread and worried too much. He thought I used coupons for groceries, that my old sweaters meant I was thrifty, not cautious. He never asked about my finances, and I never told him. I wanted him to earn his pride, not borrow mine. Sometimes I wondered if I had gone too far hiding the truth. Maybe I had built a wall so high that even my own son couldn't see me anymore. But every time I thought about telling him, I remembered Henry's voice saying, "Let him find his own strength." And so I stayed silent. As the music swelled again in the ballroom, I looked at Ethan laughing with his new wife. I saw a version of my husband in his smile and a trace of his kindness in his eyes. My heart softened, but only for a moment, because deep down I sensed something shifting like the first tremor before a storm. If you've ever kept a secret to protect the people you love, you'll understand my story. Sometimes, love means silence, but silence can also become the sharpest blade of all. And as I lifted my glass, pretending to toast to their happiness, I didn't know that the very secret I had guarded for 15 years was about to break the fragile peace I had built. The past I tried to keep buried was already stirring beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. There's a certain peace in being invisible. Over the years, I learned how to disappear without leaving. I dressed simply, kept my voice soft, and made myself small in rooms filled with loud people. I discovered that if you don't draw attention, no one asks questions. They see what they expect to see: an aging widow with a kind smile, not a woman who quietly signs investment papers that decide the fate of companies. After Henry's death, I built my own small firm, a shell company hidden behind layers of legal names. I wasn't chasing power. I just wanted control over my own life. My lawyer, Alan Price, helped me keep everything discreet. "Clara," he once said, "you could live like royalty if you wanted to." But I didn't want to. I preferred mornings with instant coffee and worn slippers to champagne brunches and social events. The more modest I appeared, the freer I felt. Then came the year 2020. While the world was struggling through a crisis, a small company in California was collapsing: Reed Technologies. It had potential but was mismanaged. The owner, Charles Reed, was desperate. Alan brought the opportunity to me. He said, "It's risky, but if anyone can save it, it's you." I looked at the numbers for hours, then made the decision. Through my firm, Mitchell Energy Holdings, I bought Reed Technologies quietly, kept its employees, and restructured its debts. I became its silent savior, though no one knew the name behind the rescue. I never met Charles Reed face to face. The deal was handled entirely through intermediaries. I didn't need gratitude. I only needed the satisfaction of knowing I had saved hundreds of families from unemployment. In some way, it made me feel closer to Henry again. He always believed that success meant helping others without expecting applause. The papers called the buyer an anonymous investor. That phrase suited me perfectly. I signed the final documents with calm hands, never imagining that this decision would one day turn my life upside down. Weeks after the acquisition, Alan told me the Reeds had lost everything. They sold their mansion in Los Angeles and moved north. "You saved their company," he said, "but pride doesn't heal that fast." I nodded, half listening. In truth, I wasn't thinking about the Reeds. I was thinking about my son, Ethan. He had started seeing someone new, a woman he said was ambitious and elegant. "She understands me, Mom," he told me over the phone one evening. "She has this drive, she's different." I smiled, happy that he had found love again after so many disappointments. I didn't ask many questions. I trusted him. That's what mothers do, we trust even when we shouldn't. Months later, he brought her to dinner. She was beautiful, yes, but there was something sharp behind her charm. "Vanessa Reed," she introduced herself, extending a manicured hand. Her eyes studied me quickly, the way a jeweler studies a stone looking for flaws, testing value. "Your home is lovely," she said, glancing around my modest living room with polite curiosity. "It feels old-fashioned, cozy." I thanked her, serving roast chicken and mashed potatoes. She smiled but barely touched her food. "Ethan says you used to be an engineer," she said. "That must have been interesting, but isn't retirement boring?" I laughed softly, deflecting. "Not really. I stay busy." She tilted her head. "Oh? Doing what?" Her tone wasn't cruel, but it carried a quiet arrogance, like someone who assumes they already know the answer. I told her about gardening, volunteering at the library, helping with local charities. I didn't mention the board meetings, the contracts, the long nights reviewing financial reports. Some truths are safer unspoken. After dinner, when they left, I stood by the window and watched them walk to Ethan's car. Vanessa held his arm possessively, whispering something that made him laugh. For the first time in years, a strange unease settled over me. Something about her confidence, the way she looked at my house, made me feel exposed. That night, as I washed the dishes, I remembered Alan's words, "The Reeds lost everything." I wondered if Vanessa could be related to that family, but dismissed the thought. The world was large, and coincidences happened every day. Still, a chill passed through me. Weeks passed, and Ethan called more often, his voice light and full of excitement. "Mom, Vanessa's parents want to meet you soon," he said. "They're amazing people." I smiled, but my heart tightened. Somehow, deep down, I already knew this meeting would change everything. If you've ever felt uneasy about someone your child brought home, that quiet fear that love might blind them, you'll understand what I felt. Sometimes, a mother's instinct sees what the heart refuses to accept. I spent the next few days preparing a small gift for Vanessa's parents, a basket of homemade preserves wrapped neatly with a ribbon. It's what polite people do. But as I tied the bow, a heavy thought crossed my mind. What if the world I'd built so carefully, brick by secret brick, was about to be exposed? When I finally met Charles and Gloria Reed, I recognized their last name instantly, yet I smiled as if it meant nothing. None of us spoke of the company. But the moment Charles shook my hand, I saw something flicker in his eyes, recognition, faint but real. And at that wedding dinner, when Vanessa's cruel words cut through the laughter, I saw that same recognition bloom into shock on Charles's face. The past I had buried was no longer hidden. The clinking of glasses filled the ballroom again, but the laughter no longer sounded cheerful. My cheeks burned as I tried to keep my smile steady. I could still hear Vanessa's cruel voice echoing, her words rolling around the tables like stones. "A fat pig," she had said, and everyone had laughed. But across the room, one man wasn't laughing. Charles Reed, her father, stared at me as if he had seen a ghost. His smile vanished. His hand froze halfway to his drink. The music, the chatter, the light, all of it seemed to fade around us. He took a few hesitant steps forward, his eyes never leaving my face. "You," he whispered, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "You're the woman from the acquisition meeting." The air turned heavy. I tried to laugh it off, my voice trembling. "I'm sorry, sir. I think you've mistaken me for someone else." But he shook his head slowly. "No, I remember those eyes. You were there when I lost my company." Every muscle in my body went rigid. I felt hundreds of eyes turned toward us, curiosity replacing laughter. Gloria Reed, Vanessa's mother, looked from her husband to me with a cold, assessing glare. The kind of look people reserve for someone they suddenly fear might be more powerful than they are. I reached for my glass, my hand steady only because I'd learned long ago never to show fear. "You must be mistaken," I said softly. "I'm just a retired widow." Charles blinked, still unsure. But I could see the wheels turning in his head, connecting dots he hadn't noticed before: the quiet investor who'd bought his failing company, the faceless name behind the contract, the woman his daughter had just humiliated in front of everyone. Vanessa laughed awkwardly. "Daddy, I think you've had too much wine." But her voice faltered, uncertain. She looked at me, confusion flickering across her perfect smile. I met her eyes, calm and unflinching, and in that brief silence, something shifted. The predator in her saw, for the first time, that she might not be the most dangerous person in the room. I wanted to disappear, but I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I straightened my shoulders, nodded politely, and murmured an excuse about feeling unwell. As I turned to leave, I heard whispers ripple behind me. The laughter had changed its tone. It wasn't mocking anymore. It was uneasy, nervous, like people sensing the presence of a secret they didn't understand. Outside, the evening air was cold. I stood beneath the vineyard lights, breathing in the faint scent of grapes and earth. For years I had hidden behind modest clothes and quiet manners, thinking invisibility was safety. But now, in one careless moment, my entire mask had cracked. I walked slowly to the parking lot, the sound of my heels muffled by the gravel. My heart thudded, not from shame anymore, but from realization. If Charles had recognized me, it was only a matter of time before Vanessa did too, and when she did, she would dig until she found everything. I sat in my car for a long time before turning the key. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked calm, but my eyes betrayed the truth. I was terrified, not of being found out, but of losing my son. Because once Ethan knew who I really was, what I'd hidden from him, he would never look at me the same again. The music from the ballroom drifted faintly through the open window. It was a slow song now, the kind that once made Henry pull me into his arms in our kitchen. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me, the years of work, love, and sacrifice. And for a moment, I wished he were still here to tell me what to do. But Henry was gone, and the woman he'd left behind was no longer just a widow. She was the keeper of a truth that could destroy her family or save it, depending on how she used it. As I drove away, the vineyard lights grew smaller in the distance. The laughter and whispers faded, but the weight of that night stayed with me. I knew the storm was coming. I could already feel it in the air. If you've ever had to swallow your pride to keep peace in your family, tell me, would you have walked away like I did? Just comment yes or no. I wonder how many of you would have stayed to fight. That night, I reached my quiet home in Santa Rosa. The porch light flickered as I stepped inside. The house felt colder than usual, emptier. I hung my coat, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the photo of Ethan as a little boy, holding his first model airplane. I whispered, "I kept everything from you to protect you, my son. But maybe tonight, that wall I built is beginning to fall." Outside, the wind rustled through the oak tree where Henry rested. It felt like a warning, or maybe a reminder that the truth never stays buried forever. The next morning, the sunlight crept through my kitchen window, but it didn't bring warmth. I hadn't slept much. The events of the wedding replayed in my mind like a cruel film. I couldn't turn off the laughter, the whispers, the look on Charles Reed's face when he recognized me. I sat at the table with a cold cup of coffee when I heard the knock on my door. It wasn't gentle. When I opened it, my son Ethan stood there, still in yesterday's wrinkled shirt. His face was pale, eyes tired, and his jaw tight with anger. "Mom," he said sharply, "what did you do?" I blinked, pretending not to understand. "What do you mean, honey?" He stepped inside, pacing the small kitchen. "Mr. Reed told me last night that you're some kind of secret investor, a millionaire. Is that true?" His voice cracked between disbelief and hurt. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words tangled in my throat. I had imagined this day for years, feared it even more than death. I set my coffee down and said softly, "Because it didn't matter, Ethan. What mattered was the life you built on your own." He let out a bitter laugh. "Didn't matter? You've been sitting on a fortune while I worked 2 jobs just to pay rent? I could have gone to grad school, Mom. You could have made things easier for me." I felt the sting of his words, but I didn't defend myself. "I didn't want you to grow up depending on money. I wanted you to learn strength. Your father and I—" "Don't bring Dad into this," he snapped. His voice filled the room, echoing off the walls. "You lied to me. All these years you made me believe you were barely getting by. I used to feel guilty for not helping you more, and now I find out you're living like some secret CEO." I took a slow breath. "Ethan, I never wanted your guilt. I wanted your peace. I wanted you to be proud of yourself, not my money." He turned away, his shoulders shaking. For the first time, I saw not the little boy who used to bring me wildflowers, but a man torn between love and betrayal. "You made me feel small," he whispered, "like I couldn't be trusted." The silence between us grew heavy. The clock on the wall ticked, each second louder than the last. Finally, I said, "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I protected you so much that I built a wall instead of a bridge." He didn't answer. He just stared out the window, his reflection caught between us in the glass. "Vanessa said she thought you were hiding something. I didn't believe her. But now—" He shook his head. "Now I don't know what to believe." The mention of Vanessa's name sent a cold wave through me. "Vanessa?" I repeated carefully. Ethan sighed, rubbing his forehead. "She texted me early this morning. She said she wants to have lunch with you. She thinks it's time to talk about our family future." His tone made the words sound like poison. I forced a small smile, hiding the knot forming in my chest. "Of course," I said. "Tell her I'll be there." He looked at me, searching for emotion in my face, but I'd learned how to keep it buried. "You'll talk to her?" he asked, almost disbelieving. "Yes," I said quietly. "It's time." He nodded slowly, then walked toward the door. For a moment, I thought he might turn back, might hug me, might remember I was still his mother. But he didn't. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded louder than any argument. I stood there for a long time, the house suddenly too quiet. The kitchen smelled faintly of burnt coffee and regret. On the counter sat a photo of Ethan as a child, missing one front tooth, holding Henry's hand. I touched the frame and whispered, "I did what I thought was right, Henry, but maybe right isn't always enough." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of the oak tree in the yard. I could almost hear Henry's calm voice reminding me to stay steady, to face what comes next with grace. But my heart was trembling. If your child ever looked at you with disappointment instead of love, you know how much that silence hurts. Tell me, have you ever felt that kind of pain? Just write yes or no in the comments. I wiped my eyes, straightened my back, and took a deep breath. The war hadn't started yet, but I could feel it coming. My phone buzzed on the table. A new message glowed on the screen. It was from Vanessa. We need to talk about our family future. Lunch tomorrow, my treat. I stared at the words, the corners of my mouth tightening. So polite, so sweet on the surface, but I knew better. This wasn't lunch. It was an invitation to battle, served with a smile. I set the phone down and whispered to myself, "All right, Vanessa, let's see what kind of game you're playing." The next day, the fog hung low over San Francisco as I drove into the city. I told myself it was just lunch, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling on the steering wheel. The restaurant Vanessa had chosen sat on the waterfront, all glass and silver, the kind of place where people whispered more than they spoke. I had never liked places like that, too polished, too full of faces pretending to be happy. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting by the window with a glass of white wine. She looked up and smiled, her expression bright, but her eyes cold. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said sweetly, "thank you for coming." I took my seat across from her. "You wanted to talk about family," I replied, folding my hands in my lap. "Yes," she said, swirling the wine in her glass. "Family and transparency." She paused, watching my reaction. "You see, my parents mentioned something interesting after the wedding. They said you looked familiar." I stayed silent. She leaned forward slightly. "My father swore he'd seen you before. Then I remembered that old article about the mysterious investor who bought Reed Technologies." She pulled out her phone, turned the screen toward me, and there it was, a blurry photograph from a business magazine. A woman in a navy blue dress, standing half in shadow. The caption read, "The anonymous angel investor saves local firm." The woman in the picture looked enough like me to raise questions, and Vanessa knew it. "Is this you?" she asked, her voice light, almost playful. "Because if it is, I think we're family in more ways than one." I looked at the image for a long time, then met her gaze. "You shouldn't believe everything you read," I said quietly. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course not. But it's strange, isn't it, that you suddenly appeared in our lives, just after my family lost everything." She leaned back, studying me the way a cat studies a bird. "Ethan says you live modestly, but that house in Santa Rosa, it's fully paid for, isn't it? And that old car, it's an interesting disguise." Every word was sharp, designed to cut. I could feel her testing me, waiting for a sign of weakness. I took a sip of water, keeping my voice calm. "I've always believed in living simply. Wealth doesn't change who I am." Vanessa tilted her head. "Oh, I think it does. Money has a funny way of revealing what people truly value. Don't you agree?" For a moment, the noise of the restaurant faded. I saw her clearly then, not as Ethan's wife, not as a young woman trying to understand me, but as someone who wanted control. The same hunger I had once seen in boardrooms and business deals now sat across from me, wearing perfume and pearls. "You know," she continued, "Ethan and I talk about our future all the time. I told him we should be honest about everything. I want to build a strong family foundation, no secrets." I smiled faintly. "Honesty is a good place to start." Her lips curved in satisfaction, mistaking my calm for surrender. "I'm glad you agree, because secrets, especially financial ones, can destroy families. Don't you think your son deserves to know everything about his mother?" That sentence hit harder than she realized. I set my napkin on the table. "You're right," I said softly. "But the truth doesn't always belong to those who demand it." Vanessa blinked, thrown off for the first time. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, standing slowly, "some things are better left private." I left money for the bill and turned toward the door. As I walked out, I could feel her gaze burning into my back, her perfect smile twisting into something sharper. I knew she wouldn't stop. She would dig until she found proof, until she could hold it over me and over Ethan. Outside, the city air felt heavy, the sound of gulls echoing over the bay. I stood by the railing for a moment, staring at the gray water. The reflection of the Golden Gate shimmered faintly through the fog, like a promise half hidden. If you've ever looked someone in the eye and known they were planning to hurt you, tell me, would you have walked away like I did? Just answer yes or no. I drove home slowly, my thoughts circling like the seagulls above. By the time I reached my house, the sun was already setting. The phone was ringing when I walked in. "Mom?" Ethan's voice sounded strained. "Vanessa showed me something today. That article about Reed Technologies. She said you lied to me." I sank into the chair, the weight of his words pressing down like a storm cloud. "Ethan, please." I don't want to talk right now, he said, his voice breaking. I just need time to think. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, the silence louder than his anger. For the first time, I realized I was losing him not to love, but to ambition. Outside, the last bit of daylight faded behind the hills. I poured myself a cup of tea I couldn't taste and whispered, "So this is how it begins." When I got home that evening, the sky was bruised with the colors of dusk purple fading into gray, the kind of light that makes you question what's real and what's already gone. I hadn't heard from Ethan all day, but I didn't expect to. I knew he needed time. Still, when the doorbell rang, my heart jumped with the smallest hope that maybe, just maybe, it was him coming to talk. It was him. But the look on his face told me everything before he even spoke. His eyes were cold, his shoulders tense. He stood in the doorway as if unsure whether he still belonged there. "I saw the article," he said quietly. "Vanessa showed me. You really did buy her father's company, didn't you?" I nodded, my voice calm. "Yes, I did." "Why?" His tone cracked like glass. "Why would you hide that from me, Mom?" I took a breath, steadying myself. "Because I didn't want my life to be about money. I wanted peace. I wanted you to build your own." He shook his head. "Peace? You call lying peaceful? You made me believe you were just getting by. I worried about you every month, and all that time you were, what? Playing rich in secret?" "Ethan," I said softly, "I wasn't playing anything. I was protecting what your father and I built, and I was protecting you from people who would see your last name as a bank account." His lips tightened. "You mean people like my wife?" The question hung between us like smoke. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He saw it in my eyes. He looked down, his hands clenching and unclenching. "Vanessa's angry. She thinks you humiliated her family. She said you did it on purpose." I sighed. I didn't even know she was a Reed until after the wedding. Life has strange ways of circling back. Ethan laughed bitterly. "Well, it circled right back into a mess." He ran a hand through his hair. "I can't believe this. You of all people hiding something like that." I wanted to tell him everything, the long nights Henry and I worked, the choices we made, the loneliness that followed, but he wasn't ready to hear it. He was seeing me not as his mother, but as a stranger who had deceived him. "Ethan," I said quietly, "you're my son. No amount of money changes that." He turned toward the door. "I need to go. Vanessa's waiting." "Please," I said, "don't let her twist this. She doesn't know the whole story." He paused, then looked back at me with tired eyes. "Maybe you should tell me the whole story sometime, but not today." And then he left. The door closed, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. I sat on the couch, the shadows stretching across the floor like long, reaching hands. I had lost him not forever, but for now, and that hurt more than all of Vanessa's insults combined. An hour later, my phone buzzed. A text, "Vanessa. Thank you for meeting me today. I think we understand each other now. Money can build bridges, Mrs. Mitchell. Let's be a family." I read it twice, maybe 3 times. Her words weren't an olive branch. They were a warning wrapped in charm. I could almost hear her voice, sweet and dangerous, pretending to offer peace while plotting her next move. I put the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the oak tree swayed in the wind, its branches tapping against the glass. Henry had planted that tree the year Ethan was born. "It'll grow strong," he'd said, "just like our boy." I pressed my hand against the window pane and whispered, "He's grown, Henry, but not the way we hoped." If your child ever listened to someone else's words over yours, if you've ever felt that distance open between you like a door that won't close, tell me, would you still wait for them to come back? Just write yes or no. I stood there for a long time, letting the stillness settle over me. Part of me wanted to call Ethan again, to explain, to make him understand, but another part of me knew it was useless. Words wouldn't break the spell Vanessa had cast. The next morning, I woke early. The house felt colder than usual. I made coffee and sat at the table, watching the steam curl into the air. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a text, it was a call from Alan Price, my lawyer and Henry's old friend. "Clara," he said in that calm, gravelly voice, "I've been doing some checking, just like you asked, and you were right to be cautious." "About what?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. Vanessa's been making inquiries, he said, financial ones. She's hired a private investigator, opened new credit lines, even reached out to a law firm that specializes in inheritance disputes. My hand tightened around the phone. She's planning something. Yes, Alan replied. She's preparing to take control of your assets through Ethan. I closed my eyes. It wasn't anger, I felt it was exhaustion. Thank you, Alan, I said. Leave it with me. I'll handle her. After I hung up, I sat in silence, the phone still in my hand. Outside, the morning sun began to rise, painting the sky gold, but all I could feel was the chill of betrayal creeping deeper into my bones. I wasn't angry at my son. He was blinded by love, just as I had once been blinded by trust. But Vanessa, she had turned love into a weapon, and I would not stand by and let her win. I walked into Henry's old study, opened the drawer, and pulled out a folder of papers, bank records, company documents, notes I had kept over the years. My hands were steady now. For the first time in a long while, I felt the sharp edge of purpose return. Let's see, I whispered to myself, just how smart this girl thinks she is. That morning, the world outside my window looked calm, too calm. The sunlight poured through the kitchen curtains, soft and golden, but inside me burned something cold and sharp. I had spent a lifetime believing silence was the same as peace, but silence had only made me small. It had invited people like Vanessa Reed to look at me and see weakness instead of restraint. I poured myself another cup of coffee, though I didn't taste it. My thoughts were already far away, circling around everything Alan Price had told me. Vanessa hiring investigators. Vanessa opening new credit lines. Vanessa whispering into my son's ear, turning suspicion into certainty. I wasn't naive. I'd been underestimated before by businessmen, by lawyers, by people who mistook my quiet nature for ignorance. But this was different. This wasn't about pride or money. This was about the only thing I had left that truly mattered, my son and my husband's legacy. I called Alan back before the clock struck 9. He answered on the first ring. I hoped you'd call, he said. I'm not going to sit and wait for her to destroy everything, I told him. I want to know exactly what she's doing, every step. Then you'll need proof, he replied. Something concrete, not just suspicion. Fine, I said. Find it. Alan hesitated. Clara, this might get ugly. She's clever. She's using Ethan's name for leverage opening accounts, creating trust documents. If she pushes further, she could drag him into legal trouble without him even realizing it. That stopped me. I felt anger crawl up my chest. She's not just going after me. She's setting him up, I said slowly. She's turning my son into a pawn. Yes, Alan said quietly. And she's good at it. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. For years, I'd built my life around staying unseen, untouchable. I'd hidden behind plain sweaters and cheap shoes while the world looked right past me. But now that same invisibility gave me power. She didn't think I'd fight back. She thought I'd crumble like some fragile old woman. She didn't know me at all. By noon, I was sitting in Alan's office, a quiet building tucked behind a row of shops in downtown Santa Rosa. His secretary smiled kindly when I walked in, an older woman who'd known Henry. You look like you mean business today, Clara, she said softly. I do, I replied, for the first time in a long time. Alan's office smelled of paper and coffee, comforting and familiar. He slid a folder across the desk. I pulled her financial footprint. You were right, she's reckless. Inside were pages of transactions, luxury purchases, loans, a few suspicious withdrawals under Ethan's name. There was even a receipt from a private investigator in San Francisco. My chest tightened. She's trying to find out how much I have, I murmured. And more than that, Alan said. She's trying to build a case. If she can prove you've hidden assets or transferred them through shell companies, she could file for a family trust claim. That would give her legal rights to part of your holdings through Ethan. She's digging for gold, I said bitterly, and she's using my son to get to it. Alan leaned forward. Then we'll make sure what she finds buries her instead. I looked up at him. How? Let me do some digging of my own, he said. Legally, of course. But I have a few contacts who still owe me favors. We'll trace her steps. Every call, every account, every lie she tells. I nodded slowly. The anger in me had hardened into something steady and cold. Good, I said. I want her to know she picked the wrong widow to underestimate. That afternoon I went home and opened Henry's old study. Dust clung to the air, glimmering in the sunlight that slanted across the room. His books still lined the shelves, filled with notes in the margins. On his desk sat a faded photograph of the two of us, him with his arm around me, both of us smiling, so young, so certain that life was fair. I sat in his chair and let my fingers rest on the wood. "They think I'm weak, Henry," I whispered. "They think being quiet means being powerless. But you always said patience is a weapon if you know when to strike." I pulled open the drawers and began organizing the documents I'd hidden over the years. Stock certificates, company deeds, investment ledgers. Each page was a reminder of everything we'd fought for, everything I'd guarded. I stacked them neatly, labeling folders with dates and names, preparing for the battle I knew was coming. The more I worked, the angrier I became, not just at Vanessa, but at the injustice of it all. How easily kindness becomes a target, how quickly silence turns into a cage. I had spent years believing that humility protected me, but humility had made me invisible even to my own child. By the time the sun began to set, my desk was covered in papers. I found one document at the bottom of a file, a letter from years ago, Henry's handwriting. He'd written it after we sold our first patent. It said, "If anything happens to me, protect what we built. Not for the money, but for the meaning." I read it 3 times before folding it back. "I will," I whispered. "I promise." The promise became my armor. I called Alan again. "Do what you need to," I said, "but I want to know everything she's done by tomorrow." He paused. "That soon?" "Yes, because tomorrow, I'm not waiting anymore. I'm taking the first step." That night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked softly, the old clock ticking like a heartbeat. I sat in the living room, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows. I thought about Ethan, how he used to run into my arms when he was scared, how he once believed I could fix anything. Now I wasn't sure if he'd ever see me the same way again, but I would protect him anyway. That's what mothers do, even when their children no longer believe in them. Outside, a storm was forming, the wind rattling against the windows. I stood there, staring out into the darkness, feeling the weight of what was coming. The anger didn't fade. It settled deeper, steadying me. By morning, Alan called. "Clara, we have something," he said. "Vanessa's debts are worse than I thought. She's leveraged her father's old business contacts and owes thousands. She's desperate. That's why she's doing this." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "Desperate people make mistakes." He chuckled. "Exactly. Let's make sure hers lead her straight into your hands." I hung up and looked around the quiet house. The storm outside had passed, leaving the air clean and cold. The battle ahead no longer frightened me. For the first time in years, I felt the same fire that once carried Henry and me through sleepless nights and endless challenges. Vanessa thought I'd fade into the background, too afraid to fight back. But she'd forgotten something important. When you take everything from a woman who has already lost once, you leave her with nothing to fear. The following morning broke gray and quiet, the kind of morning that makes even the strongest coffee taste bitter. I sat in Henry's old study, the papers Alan had sent me spread across the desk like a battlefield. Numbers, dates, statements, every line told the same story. Vanessa Reed was drowning, and she was dragging my son down with her. Alan's investigation had gone deeper overnight. He'd traced her credit accounts, tax filings, and private contracts. The truth was worse than I expected. The Reeds weren't just struggling, they were ruined. Charles Reed's old company had never recovered after the acquisition. Their mansion had been sold to pay debts, and their savings had been wiped out by bad investments. Vanessa's so-called consulting work was a front. She'd been living off the monthly consulting fees quietly funneled from Reed Technologies, the same company I had saved years earlier. In other words, she'd been living off my money long before she ever met my son. I stared at the papers, feeling a slow heat rise in my chest. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. For 15 years, I'd hidden from the world, letting people underestimate me because it was easier that way. But now, every lie Vanessa told had sharpened something inside me I thought was long dead. She wanted to play games with money and power? Fine. But she was about to learn that quiet women don't stay quiet forever. I spent the rest of the morning organizing everything Alan had given me. I made notes in neat handwriting, dates, sources, connections. I highlighted the inconsistencies in her bank records, the large purchases she'd made right before marrying Ethan, the legal advice she'd sought on trust inheritance. It was all there, a trail of greed written in ink and arrogance. By noon, Alan called again. "You were right," he said. "She's been meeting with a lawyer named Gregory Shaw. He's known for helping clients exploit family trusts. She's trying to create something binding before you can cut her off." My grip tightened on the phone. "So she's already planning her next move." "Yes," he said. "And from what I hear, she's rushing. She knows you're not an easy target." "She thinks she's smart," I said coldly. "But she's sloppy." Alan hesitated, then asked, "What are you going to do, Clara?" "Finish what I started," I said, "and make sure she never touches another dime of my husband's work." After hanging up, I walked into the living room and looked around my quiet home. Everything felt different now, no longer a refuge, but a command center. I sat down at the small wooden table where Henry and I used to play cards, opened my laptop, and began building my own case. For hours, I dug through archives, public records, and old news articles. I found court filings showing that the Reeds had defaulted on multiple loans. I found that Vanessa had taken out a personal line of credit 6 months before meeting Ethan. She'd also listed potential inheritance as a financial guarantee on the application. I could almost hear Henry's voice beside me. "Follow the paper, Clara. The paper never lies." By late afternoon, I had everything I needed, a full portrait of who she really was. A predator wrapped in silk and charm, built on deceit, feeding on my son's love and my silence. I printed the documents and arranged them neatly into a binder. As I flipped through the pages, one detail stopped me cold. A small receipt from a jewelry store in Los Angeles, $5,000, charged to a joint account she'd opened under Ethan's name. I pressed my hand against the page, feeling my pulse in my fingertips. She wasn't just stealing from me. She was using my son's name to buy her illusions. I closed the binder with a snap. That sound firm, final, was the beginning of my retaliation. That evening, I called Alan again. "Meet me tomorrow," I said. "We're setting things in motion." He didn't ask what I meant. He knew. When I hung up, I sat by the window, watching the sky darken over Santa Rosa. The wind moved through the oak tree outside, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. I felt ready. I spent the next few hours preparing my evidence, copies of statements, photographs, receipts. I wrote down everything I planned to say if this ever went to court, every detail that could expose her motives. It wasn't enough to protect my assets. I needed to make sure she could never use Ethan again. The more I worked, the more the anger in me changed. It wasn't just rage anymore. It was focus, purpose. Every keystroke, every note I took, brought back the woman I used to be, the engineer who solved problems one step at a time. I had let grief turn me into someone small, but now I remembered who I was. By midnight, my desk was covered with evidence. I leaned back in the chair and looked around the room. Henry's photograph sat on the bookshelf, smiling that same steady smile. "You'd tell me to stay calm," I murmured. "But you'd also tell me to fight smart. That's exactly what I'm going to do." The next morning, Alan met me at a small cafe downtown. He arrived with a folder of his own. "I pulled a few favors," he said. "You'll want to see this." Inside were emails between Vanessa and her lawyer, Gregory Shaw. They discussed forming a family trust under Ethan's name, which would give her partial access to my financial holdings through marriage. One line made my blood run cold. "Once the assets are legally recognized as shared, Mrs. Mitchell's control becomes limited." I closed the folder slowly. "She's trying to trap me." Alan nodded. "Yes. But now that we know her plan, we can use it against her." We spent the next few hours mapping out a strategy. I would act as if I didn't know what Vanessa was doing. Let her think she had the upper hand. When she presented her family plan, I'd expose her lies in front of witnesses, with every document ready to show the truth. "Clara," Alan said quietly before I left, "you're about to start a war." I met his eyes and replied, "No, Alan, I'm about to end one." That night, back home, I placed the binder of evidence on the kitchen table. The house was silent again, but this time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt like the calm before justice. As I turned off the light, I knew exactly what came next. Vanessa's greed had finally pushed me too far, and the next move would be hers, but I'd already written the ending. It was a bright Saturday morning when Vanessa showed up at my door, her knock sharp and confident. Through the glass, I could see her silhouette, straight posture, designer coat, a portfolio tucked under one arm. She looked like a woman coming to close a business deal, not visit her husband's mother. I took a slow breath before opening the door. "Vanessa," I said evenly. "You're early." She smiled, that same polished smile that never reached her eyes. "I thought we could have some coffee while we talk. I brought something important." I stepped aside. "Of course, come in." She walked in like she owned the place, glancing around as though inspecting a property she might soon inherit. Her perfume filled the room, sweet, heavy, expensive. I led her to the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd raised my son, cooked 1,000 meals, and cried 1,000 nights. She sat down, crossing her legs neatly. "I hope you don't mind," she began, sliding a folder across the table. "I wanted to discuss something that would benefit all of us, the future of the Mitchell family." I didn't touch the folder yet. "Go on." She smiled again. "It's a proposal. I call it the Mitchell Family Foundation. It's designed to consolidate all our assets into one protected fund, transparent, legally structured, and democratic." "Democratic?" I echoed, keeping my tone mild. "Yes," she said, as if she were explaining something to a child. "You, Ethan, and I would all have equal management rights. 3 votes, 1 voice. It's the best way to ensure the money is handled responsibly for generations to come." I finally opened the folder. Inside were pages of legal documents, complex, professional-looking, but I knew immediately what they were: a trap. The so-called foundation would transfer all my holdings into a joint account that Vanessa could legally access. Once I signed, I'd lose control over nearly $50 million. I looked up slowly, meeting her eyes. "You've done your homework," I said softly. "I believe in planning ahead," she replied smoothly. "Ethan and I want to build something meaningful. Family wealth shouldn't be hidden, it should be shared." I smiled faintly. "Shared. That's a lovely word." She took it as encouragement. "Exactly. I think it's time we modernized how we manage things. Families today don't keep secrets. We make decisions together." I leaned back in my chair. "And what would your role be, dear?" Her expression flickered with satisfaction. "Equal votes, of course. Democracy is healthy for families." I studied her for a long moment, then let a small, cold smile curve my lips. "Yes," I said, "especially for those who marry for profit." The words hit her like a slap, though she tried to hide it. Her eyes narrowed. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Oh, I think you do." I closed the folder and pushed it gently back toward her. "You see, I've been doing some research of my own." For the first time since she walked in, her confidence faltered. "What kind of research?" "The kind that tells me exactly who you are, Vanessa Reed," I said evenly. "The debts, the investigators, the inheritance lawyer." "You've been busy." Her face went pale, then hardened. "You had no right." "I had every right," I cut in. My voice stayed calm, but the air around us thickened. "You came into my son's life under false pretenses. You planned to use him, and now you think you can use me. But you forget I've seen people like you before. I used to negotiate with men twice your age and 10 times your greed." She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I leaned forward slightly. "Let me make something clear. You're in my house. You may have charmed my son, but you will not take what Henry and I built, not a single dollar." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she forced a shaky laugh. "You're overreacting. It's just a financial proposal. I wanted to involve you." "Involve me?" I repeated softly. "Or eliminate me?" She looked away, the color draining from her face. "You're twisting things." "Am I?" I said. I slid a single sheet of paper toward her, one of the documents Alan had prepared. "This is a full record of your accounts, loans, and credit filings. You've been living beyond your means, Vanessa, and using my son's name to do it." Her lips parted, but no words came. "Here's what's going to happen," I said quietly. "You'll take your little foundation and leave. You'll go back to your lawyer and tell him I said no. And if you so much as touch $1 more under Ethan's name, I'll make sure the authorities see everything in this folder." Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "You wouldn't do that. It would ruin Ethan, too." I met her gaze steadily. "Then I suggest you start protecting him the way a wife should. We sat there in silence for a long moment, the tension thick enough to choke on. Then she stood up abruptly, gathering her papers with shaking hands. "You'll regret this," she said under her breath. I smiled faintly. "No, dear, you will." She left without another word, the door slamming behind her. I stood there for a long time, listening to the fading sound of her heels on the walkway. My heart was beating hard, but not with fear, with something close to relief. For the first time in weeks, I had faced her without flinching. I poured myself a glass of water, staring at the folder she had left behind. The words Mitchell Family Foundation gleamed across the front in neat, expensive print. I picked it up, tore it straight down the middle, and dropped it into the trash. The paper made a crisp, satisfying sound. Then I walked into Henry's study, sat in his old chair, and let the silence settle. I knew this wasn't over. Vanessa wasn't the kind of woman to retreat quietly. She would come back, meaner and more desperate. But now, I was ready. If you've ever had to stand up to someone who thought they could control you, you understand that strange calm that follows the quiet certainty that you've finally drawn the line. Tell me, would you have done the same? Just yes or no. I looked at the window where the afternoon sun touched the oak leaves outside. For years, I had lived hidden in the shadows of my own choosing. But now, I felt something shift, a quiet return of strength I thought I'd lost with Henry. I whispered, "It's time, Henry." She's shown her hand. Now it's my turn. The following evening, the storm finally broke inside my house, not outside. Ethan called just before sunset, his voice tight, asking if we could talk. I heard the strain beneath his words, the hesitation that always came when he didn't know which side to take. I told him to come by, and when I hung up, I knew this conversation would change everything. An hour later, his car pulled up. He wasn't alone. Vanessa followed him through the front door, her smile thin and trembling. She carried herself like someone prepared to act innocent but ready to attack if cornered. Ethan stood behind her, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, eyes darting between us. "Mom," he began softly, "I think we should clear the air. Vanessa just wants to talk." I nodded, motioning toward the living room. "Then let's talk." Vanessa sat down first, crossing her legs. "Mrs. Mitchell," she started, "I know we've had our misunderstandings. I didn't mean to upset you. I just wanted to help Ethan build a secure future. Families should work together, not against each other." Her voice was syrupy sweet, but her eyes were cold and calculating. She thought she still held the upper hand. I let her finish, folding my hands neatly on my lap. "You're right," I said softly. "Family should be honest." I stood up and walked to the small cabinet beside the sofa. From the top drawer, I pulled out a thick brown envelope. "That's why I think it's time to be completely transparent." Vanessa's eyes followed my hands. I laid the envelope on the coffee table, untied the string, and began to spread out the contents: bank statements, private investigator reports, recordings, and photographs. The evidence gleamed under the lamp like a courtroom display. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "The truth," I said. "All of it." Ethan frowned, confused. "Mom, what are you doing?" I looked at him first, gently but firmly, "Showing you who your wife really is." I slid a page toward him, one of Alan's reports. "This is from the investigator she hired to find my financial holdings. And this," I said, handing him another sheet, "is her credit report. You'll notice your name on several of her loans." Vanessa lunged forward. "That's private. You have no right." "I have every right," I interrupted sharply. "You used my son's identity. You signed his name to things he didn't understand." Ethan's face turned pale. "Vanessa, what is this?" She forced a shaky laugh. "It's nonsense, Ethan. Your mother's trying to turn you against me. Look at her, she's paranoid." But I wasn't finished. I pressed a button on the small recorder in my hand, and her voice filled the room clear, undeniable. "I just need to find a man from a wealthy family, someone stable. Once the papers are signed, I'll be set." Ethan froze. His expression drained of color as the words echoed through the house. Vanessa leapt from her chair, lunging for the recorder. "You had no right to record that." "I didn't," I said evenly. "The investigator did. The law allows it when fraud is suspected." Her face twisted. "This is insane. You're destroying your own family." "No," I said, standing tall. "I'm saving it." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Ethan stared at his wife, his lips trembling. "Tell me it isn't true," he whispered. Vanessa's eyes darted between us, panic flickering in her face. "It's not like that. You don't understand. He stepped back from her. "How could you? All this time, I defended you." His voice cracked with disbelief. "You married me for money?" Tears filled her eyes, but there was no sincerity in them, only fear. "Ethan, please. Stop." He lifted a hand, shaking his head. "Just stop." I watched her crumble, her perfect mask slipping away. For months, she had played her game, charming and lying with precision, and now she stood exposed, cornered by her own greed. She turned to me suddenly, her voice sharp, trembling with fury. "You think you've won, don't you? You think you're clever because you've been rich in secret all this time, but you're just a lonely old woman hiding behind money." Her words were meant to wound, but I didn't flinch. I looked her straight in the eye. "I don't punish curiosity," I said quietly. "I punish greed." The color drained from her face. For a moment, she looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as Ethan's mother, not as a harmless widow, but as the woman who had built, lost, and rebuilt her world with her own two hands. Ethan sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. "I can't believe this," he murmured. "I thought we were building something real." Vanessa took a step toward him, desperate now. "Ethan, please, listen to me." But he didn't move. He just stared at the floor, his face pale and hollow. Finally, I gathered the papers and tucked them back into the envelope. "You should go," I told her. My voice was calm, final. "Take whatever dignity you still have left and leave my home." She glared at me, but I could see the fight draining out of her. She turned to Ethan one last time. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You'll regret letting her control you." Then she stormed out, the sound of the door slamming echoing through the house. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Ethan's uneven breathing. I walked over and placed my hand gently on his shoulder. He didn't pull away, but he didn't look at me either. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "I should have believed you sooner." "You see what she really wanted now," I said softly. "But don't hate her, Ethan. People like that destroy themselves without our help." He nodded slowly, still staring into space. The storm outside had quieted, but inside the house, the air felt thick with the remains of battle. That night, after he left, I sat alone in the living room. The lamp cast a small circle of light across the scattered papers, and I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. I felt no triumph, just a strange, hollow calm. The truth had been revealed, and in its light everything looked different. I thought of Henry, of the nights we'd planned every investment, of the dream we'd had for our son. I had kept my promise to protect what we built, but it had come at a cost. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves, carrying away the echoes of Vanessa's voice. I knew it wasn't over. People like her don't go quietly. She would strike back somehow out of spite, out of pride. But I was no longer afraid. The week after the confrontation, my house no longer felt like home. The silence that had once been comforting now pressed on my chest like a weight. Every sound a creaking floorboard, the wind outside felt like a reminder of what had been broken. Ethan stopped calling. I didn't blame him. After what he'd seen, he needed space. But deep down, I feared that space would only give Vanessa room to strike again. And she did. It started 3 days later. A crisp white envelope arrived by certified mail. At first I thought it was from Alan, more documents about the fallout. But when I opened it, my hands went cold. The letterhead belonged to the Internal Revenue Service. The words leapt from the page, "Notice of investigation." I skimmed the text once, twice, and then I sat down hard in Henry's old chair. Vanessa had filed a complaint against me, accusing me of tax fraud, investment manipulation, and concealment of assets. The report claimed that I had used shell companies to hide income, that I had stolen Reed Technologies through unethical practices. It was all lies, but well written, filled with just enough truth to sound believable. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. My first instinct was fear, a deep, hollow fear that made my fingers tremble. But that fear quickly turned into something sharper, anger. She wasn't just trying to ruin my name, she was trying to destroy my life's work, the company Henry and I built with every sleepless night and every sacrifice. By noon, I was in Alan's office again. He looked up from the papers, His brow furrowed. "She's good," he said grimly. "She made it sound legitimate. Enough to make the IRS curious." "I didn't do anything wrong," I said, my voice low but steady. "I know that," he replied. "But they'll still dig. Once an accusation like this is filed, they have to investigate." I nodded slowly, staring at the letter in his hand. "She's not after the truth, Alan. She's after control." Alan sighed, removing his glasses. "I've seen this before. It's not about money anymore, it's about winning. She wants to make me look guilty," I said. "To isolate Ethan even more." "She knows exactly what she's doing," he admitted. "But we'll handle this. I'll contact the auditors, prepare the records. You've got everything documented, right?" "Every receipt," I said firmly. "Henry and I always did things by the book." He nodded. "Then we'll fight it. But you need to prepare yourself. She'll use Ethan again. She'll convince him you're hiding something. Be ready." I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I knew Alan was right. Vanessa would use the only weapon she had left my son's loyalty. That night the phone rang. It was Ethan. "Mom," he said quietly, "Vanessa told me what's happening. She said you're being investigated for fraud. Is that true?" The sound of his voice nearly broke me, but I forced my tone to stay calm. "Yes, the IRS contacted me, but it's not what she's saying, Ethan. She filed that report herself. It's retaliation." He hesitated. "She said she had proof emails, documents. She said you used fake companies to buy her father's business." I felt my heart twist. "Ethan," I said softly, "I use legal entities to protect privacy. That's all. Your father and I built those structures to manage investments, not to cheat anyone. Every cent is accounted for." He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "You should have told me everything. Maybe this wouldn't be happening." The disappointment in his voice cut deeper than the accusation itself. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want this life to poison yours," I said. "You were supposed to have peace, not paperwork and lawyers." He sighed, weary. "I don't know who to believe anymore." "Believe what you saw with your own eyes, Ethan," I said quietly. "Believe the truth, not her fear." He didn't answer. The line went dead. I sat there in the dark, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence on the other end. For the first time in a long while, tears came hot, angry tears that blurred the room around me. I had done everything to protect him, but it had only driven him further away. The next morning Alan called. "I've spoken with their legal department," he said. "They'll start reviewing the case next week. Don't worry, we'll prove she fabricated it." "I'm not worried about the IRS," I said flatly. "I'm worried about Ethan." "I know," he replied. "But sometimes the only way to protect someone is to show them what truth looks like under pressure." For the next several days, I prepared every document they might ask for. Tax forms, transaction records, patents, investment contracts, everything was in order, as it always had been. Each night, I worked at the kitchen table until my back ached. Each morning, I reminded myself that I had nothing to hide. Still, the shame lingered. Not guilt shame. Shame that my own family name was now tied to scandal, that my neighbors might whisper, that Henry's memory was being dragged through the mud. A week later, an official envelope arrived confirming the investigation. I didn't flinch this time. I placed it in a folder marked Defense and poured myself a cup of coffee. The bitterness steadied me. That afternoon, I received another call, this time from an unknown number. When I answered, Vanessa's voice came through, smooth and smug. "Quite a mess you've made, Mrs. Mitchell," she said. "The authorities take fraud seriously. Maybe next time you'll think twice before embarrassing me in front of my husband." "You've gone too far," I said quietly. "Too far?" She laughed. "I haven't even started. By the time this is over, Ethan will hate you so much he'll beg me to cut you out of our lives." I didn't hang up. I wanted to hear her finish, to hear just how much darkness could live in a single voice. "You don't scare me," I said finally. "You never did." She paused. "Then you should," she whispered, and the line went dead. I stood there for a long time, the phone heavy in my hand. My anger was gone now, replaced by something deeper, a cold determination. She wanted a war in the open. She would get one. That night, I met Alan again. "It's time," I said. "No more waiting. I want every move documented, every conversation recorded. If she wants a legal fight, she'll get it, but on my terms." He nodded. "You've got the truth on your side. That's more powerful than any accusation. As I left his office, the evening sun dipped low over the horizon, turning the sky gold and red. The light caught the framed photograph on his wall, Henry shaking hands with Alan years ago, and for a moment, I felt my husband's presence beside me again. "She's not after the truth," I murmured to myself as I stepped outside. "She's after control, but she's forgotten one thing. I don't break." 3 weeks later, I found myself standing in the lobby of a law firm in downtown San Francisco. The air smelled of leather and old paper, the kind of scent that clings to places where too many secrets have been signed away. I'd been here before, years ago, when Henry and I finalized business contracts that changed our lives. But this time, I wasn't here for business. I was here for war. Alan Price walked beside me, calm and composed. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. "I've been ready for weeks," I said. "She's the one who doesn't know what's coming." We took the elevator to the 12th floor. The conference room was glass-walled, with a sweeping view of the bay. Inside sat Vanessa, her parents, their lawyer, and my son. Ethan avoided my eyes. Vanessa looked flawless, dressed in white like she wanted to appear pure. Her father, Charles, sat stiffly beside her, his jaw set tight. He looked older than I remembered shamed men always do. "Mrs. Mitchell," their lawyer greeted, his tone overly polite. "Thank you for coming. I hope we can resolve this matter peacefully." "Peace depends on honesty," I said, taking my seat. Vanessa smiled, that same rehearsed smile she wore at her wedding. "I think we can all agree that what happened was unfortunate. But family should come together, not fall apart. That's why I'm proposing a compromise." Her lawyer slid a document across the table. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said smoothly, "my clients would like to establish a shared family foundation, funded initially by $15 million. This foundation would ensure long-term stability for all members of the Mitchell and Reed families." Alan glanced at me, then back at the lawyer. "And who controls this foundation?" "It would be jointly managed by Mrs. Mitchell, her son, and Mrs. Vanessa Reed Mitchell," the lawyer said. "Equal voting rights." I almost laughed. The audacity was almost admirable. I turned to Vanessa. "You've been consistent, I'll give you that." "I'm only thinking of the future," she replied sweetly. "Your son deserves security. Your grandchildren will too." I leaned forward slightly. "You don't have children yet, Vanessa." Her smile wavered. "Someday," she said quickly. "It's never too early to plan." I could feel Ethan's discomfort radiating beside her. He looked torn, his hands clenched on the table. He wanted peace, not truth. That was always his weakness. He thought love could fix what greed had already rotted. Their lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Mitchell, perhaps you'd like to make a counteroffer?" I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "I do have an offer." The room went quiet. I could hear the faint hum of traffic from below, the tick of the wall clock marking every heartbeat. "I'll give you $5 million, I said calmly, "on one condition." Vanessa's eyes lit up for a second, then narrowed. "What condition?" "That you and your parents disappear from our lives. Permanently. No more lawsuits, no more contact, no more manipulations. You take the money and vanish." The silence that followed was suffocating. Charles Reed shifted uncomfortably, his face flushing. Gloria, his wife, looked like she might faint. Vanessa's lawyer blinked. "Mrs. Mitchell, are you sure you—" "I'm not negotiating," I interrupted. "That's the offer. $5 million to leave. Refuse it and you get nothing but subpoenas." Vanessa stared at me, her face unreadable. "You think you can buy me off?" she said quietly. "No," I replied. "I think I can buy peace. For my son." Ethan finally spoke. "Mom," his voice trembled. "This isn't necessary." I turned to him, my tone gentle. "Yes, it is. Some lessons cost money. Some cost love. This one costs both." Vanessa's lawyer leaned toward her, whispering something. She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on me, calculating. Then, slowly, she said, $5 million now? And you'll never see us again?" "That's right," I said. She hesitated. I could see her pride fighting her desperation. Her parents shifted beside her. Charles staring down at his hands, Gloria looking at the floor. Finally, Vanessa exhaled shakily. "Fine, we'll take it." Ethan's eyes widened. "Vanessa, what are you?" She cut him off sharply. "You think I want to stay where I'm not wanted?" She looked back at me. Transfer the money, and you'll never hear from me again." Alan slid the prepared settlement agreement across the table. "Already drafted," he said calmly. "Sign here, and it's binding." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the scratch of her pen. When she finished, she pushed the paper toward me and stood. Her face was pale but defiant. "I hope you're happy, Mrs. Mitchell," she said coldly. "I'm not happy," I replied, "but I am done." She gathered her things and walked out without another word. Her parents followed, Charles avoiding my eyes as they passed. When the door closed, Ethan sat back, rubbing his temples. "I can't believe this," he whispered. I looked at him, my heart aching. "You saw who she really was. That's enough." He nodded slowly. "I guess I did." He stood, hesitated, then leaned down and kissed my forehead. "I just wish it didn't have to end like this." "So do I said. As we left the conference room, the late afternoon light flooded the hallway, reflecting off the glass walls like liquid gold. For the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. The war was over, even if no one had truly won. When I stepped outside, the wind from the bay brushed against my face. The world seemed quieter. I thought of Henry again, his voice, his patience, his steady belief that decency would always prevail in the end. Maybe he'd been right. I looked at Alan and said softly, "$5 million is a small price to end a nightmare." He nodded. "You did the right thing, Clara. Some people only learn through consequence." As we walked toward the car, I saw a young couple passing by laughing, holding hands, full of the kind of trust I once had in my son and his wife. It made my chest ache, but not with sorrow anymore, with understanding. If you were in my place, would you have done the same? Just answer yes or no. That night, when I got home, the house felt different, lighter somehow. I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the moon rise over the oak tree. It had survived every storm, every season. So had I. But deep down, I knew something else was coming. Greed never walks away quietly. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. After years of turbulence, the silence in my home felt almost foreign. No more ringing phones, no more lawyers, no more arguments. Just quiet. The kind that seeps into your bones and stays there. Vanessa Reed Mitchell disappeared from our lives like a storm finally losing its strength. The settlement was honored, the money was transferred, and then she was gone. Her number disconnected. Her father sold what was left of their property in Los Angeles. Rumor had it they moved to Arizona, chasing new opportunities that never came. I didn't ask for details. Some stories don't deserve a sequel. Ethan filed for divorce a month later. It wasn't easy for him, but it was necessary. He called me the day after signing the papers. His voice was quiet, humbled. "It's over, Mom," he said. "I should have listened to you sooner." I didn't scold him. I just said, "You needed to see it yourself, son. That's how lessons stay." After the call, I sat in the garden under the oak tree. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, painting the grass with gold. For the first time in years, I felt something loosen inside me. The constant tension, the fear of losing him, it all began to fade. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "We did it, Henry. It's finally over." Ethan and I didn't rush back into each other's lives. Healing takes time, and forgiveness isn't a door you can simply open. It's a bridge you have to rebuild one plank at a time. But he started calling more often. Sometimes it was to ask about recipes from his childhood. Other times he'd just say, "I was driving by Santa Rosa and thought of you." Those calls were small, ordinary things, but they were everything to me. One Sunday morning he came to visit. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize the man standing there. His eyes were softer, his smile quieter. He held a small bouquet of daisies, clumsy and uneven, but perfect. "These used to be Dad's favorite," he said. "They still are," I replied, taking the flowers. We sat in the kitchen drinking coffee, the same way we used to before everything fell apart. At first, we spoke about ordinary things, his job, the house he was renovating, the new people he'd met. But then his tone shifted. "Mom," he said, "I met someone. Her name was Laura Bennett. She was an art teacher at a community college in Sonoma." "She paints landscapes," Ethan said, his eyes lighting up. "She's simple, kind, not like—" He stopped himself, lowering his gaze. I smiled gently. "You don't have to explain, Ethan. Sometimes the right people don't dazzle us. They make us feel safe." He nodded slowly. She makes me feel like myself again. In the months that followed, I met Laura several times. She was exactly as Ethan described, soft-spoken, thoughtful, genuine. She never once mentioned money or success. Instead, she talked about her students, her garden, the stray cat she'd rescued from the college parking lot. She had the kind of warmth that made everyone around her breathe easier. One evening, Ethan invited me to dinner at their small apartment. The table was set with mismatched dishes and a single candle flickering in the center. Laura cooked pasta and garlic bread, nothing fancy, but the smell filled the room with comfort. As we ate, I watched Ethan laugh. Really laugh. It had been years since I'd seen that expression unguarded, light, free of guilt or pressure. My heart swelled quietly. For the first time in so long, he looked like my son again. After dinner, Laura brought out a small cake she'd baked. "It's not perfect," she said shyly. "I'm still learning." "It's beautiful," I told her, and meant it. Ethan smiled at me across the table. "Mom, Laura wants to meet Dad's old friends one day. She said she wants to hear stories about him." That simple sentence undid me. I felt tears fill my eyes, and before I could stop them, one slipped down my cheek. "Your father would have liked her," I whispered. "He really would." Laura reached out and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she said softly. Later that night, when I got home, the house didn't feel empty anymore. The walls that had once echoed with silence now carried the faint memory of laughter. I walked into Henry's study and looked at his photograph. "He's all right now," I said. "She's good for him." The next few weeks were filled with small joys. Ethan came over every Sunday for lunch. Sometimes he brought Laura, sometimes he came alone. We cooked together, watched old movies, and talked about things that didn't hurt anymore. The distance between us had been replaced by something stronger: understanding. One evening, as the sun set over Santa Rosa, we sat on the porch drinking tea. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange. Ethan turned to me and said, "Mom, I never thanked you for protecting Dad's legacy." "You don't have to," I replied. "That's what love does, it protects, even when it hurts." He nodded, his eyes glistening. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He reached over and hugged me. It wasn't the kind of quick, polite hug adults give their parents out of habit. It was tight, trembling, filled with everything words couldn't carry. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." I held him close and said, "You came back. That's all that matters." The moon rose over the oak tree, casting silver light across the yard. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the sound made me smile. Life had finally returned to something resembling peace. Inside the house, the clock ticked steadily, the same rhythm Henry had once said reminded him of time's mercy. I looked at my son and realized that the years hadn't broken us. They'd simply taught us how to bend. That night, as I locked the front door and turned off the lights, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: contentment. The storm had passed, and though it left scars, it also left clarity. But even in peace, I knew there was one final step left. Something I needed to do, not for Ethan, not for vengeance, but for closure. I walked into Henry's study, opened the drawer, and pulled out the file labeled Henry Foundation. The papers were ready, everything set for the charity we'd dreamed of creating. It was time. When spring came, the garden bloomed again. The air carried the scent of lilacs and rosemary, Henry's favorite combination. I spent most mornings outside, trimming the roses or sitting quietly on the porch with my tea. The house was finally peaceful, filled with sunlight instead of sorrow. A few months had passed since Ethan's divorce was finalized. Life had returned to something ordinary, something gentle. He and Laura married quietly in a small ceremony at a vineyard just outside Santa Rosa. No lavish gowns, no photographers, no social media posts. Just love, pure and steady. When he asked me to walk him down the aisle, I nearly cried. I'd never imagined a mother could walk her son that way. But as I took his arm and led him toward his new beginning, I felt Henry there too, somewhere between the breeze and the music. After the ceremony, Laura came to me with a soft smile. "We've been talking," she said. "Ethan told me about the idea you and Mr. Henry once had, the scholarship for engineering students. We want to help you start it." I blinked back tears. For years, the Henry Foundation had been just a folder tucked away in my desk, a dream deferred. Now, it was finally time. A month later, we filed the paperwork. The foundation became official. We offered small scholarships to underprivileged students, kids who wanted to study science and technology but couldn't afford it. The first recipient was a young woman from Oakland, the daughter of a factory worker. When she came to meet me, her hands shook as she said, "I just want to make something that lasts." I smiled at her and replied, "That's how every great thing begins." From that day on, the foundation became my new purpose. I spent my mornings gardening and my afternoons reading applications, mentoring students, and writing checks with my own hand. It was quiet work, meaningful work, the kind of work that fills the heart without drawing attention. One evening, I received a letter in the mail, a formal envelope with elegant handwriting. It wasn't from Ethan, nor from the foundation. The return address caught my eye: Phoenix, Arizona. My heart gave a small, unexpected flutter. I opened it carefully. Inside was a short note on cream stationery. "Mrs. Mitchell, I wanted to let you know that I've started over. It hasn't been easy. You were right about me. Greed never gives peace, it only takes it away. I hope one day Ethan can forgive me. You don't have to write back. Vanessa." I read it twice, then placed it on the table beside my cup of tea. The handwriting was still confident, but something in the words had softened. There was no bitterness left, only the weary humility that life eventually teaches us all. For a moment I thought of tearing it up, but I didn't. I folded it gently and placed it in the drawer beside Henry's photograph. People change, sometimes too late, but change all the same. Maybe that was her punishment and her redemption. Weeks turned into months. The foundation grew, and so did my peace. Ethan and Laura visited every Sunday, sometimes bringing their friends, sometimes just themselves. They filled the house with laughter again. It was strange how life had come full circle. The house that had once echoed with pain was now alive with warmth. One afternoon I was preparing cookies for a charity event when Ethan came into the kitchen holding a small box. "Mom," he said, "Laura and I wanted to show you something." Inside the box was a sonogram, tiny, black and white, barely the size of my palm. "We're having a baby," he whispered. My breath caught. Tears welled up before I could stop them. "A baby," I repeated softly. "Oh, Henry, can you hear this?" Ethan smiled. "We want to name him Henry, if it's a boy." I covered my mouth with my hand. The world seemed to still around me. After everything, the loss, the betrayal, the silence, life had found its way back to joy. A simple, quiet joy. That night, after they left, I sat by the window as the last light faded from the sky. The oak tree stood strong and tall, its leaves whispering in the wind. I thought of all that had been taken from me, and all that had been returned. But fate had one more small twist to give. A few days later, while sorting through old papers for the foundation, I came across a sealed envelope hidden behind a row of Henry's notebooks. It was yellowed with age, the handwriting unmistakable Henry's. My heart raced as I carefully unfolded it. "My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, I'm not there to say it aloud. I've left you something, a small account under your maiden name. I wanted you to have it privately, so you'd always have the freedom to do what you loved most, help others. When you decide to use it, make sure it's for something that reminds the world who you are, not who I was. Love, Henry." I sat there for a long time, holding the letter to my chest. The account number was still legible. I checked it the next morning. With Alan's help, it held nearly $2 million. Henry had hidden it from even me to make sure I'd never be without choices. With that money, I expanded the foundation, adding a mentorship program for widowed women looking to start over. Every name, every face reminded me of my own journey. The pain, the loneliness, the quiet strength it takes to rebuild from nothing. And maybe that was the real ending to our story. Not revenge, not victory, but renewal. Now, when I sit in the garden at dusk, I sometimes imagine Henry sitting beside me. I can almost hear him say, "You did it, Clara. You turned pain into purpose." The wind moves through the oak branches, and I smile. Because I know he's right. Life doesn't always give you happy endings, but it gives you second chances if you're brave enough to take them. So this is where my story rests, not in bitterness, but in peace. If you've listened this far, thank you for sharing this quiet corner of my life. If you feel the same ache I once did, if you believe that love and forgiveness can rebuild what time tried to break, press like so I know I'm not alone. If you didn't like this story, Leave the number 6 in the comments so I can do better next time. And don't forget to subscribe so together we can keep telling stories that reach the heart, stories about loss, resilience, and the quiet kind of love that never fades. Because, in the end, real happiness isn't about winning. It's about finally finding peace and knowing you've earned it.